against the Jaguars, I thought that he was great. And I think that when you consider all of the factors that went into this Bengals season, I don't think that Callahan really should be at fault. Now, they have a very talented offense for sure. They have Joe Mixon, a great running back, and they have had up to this point maybe the best receiver trio in the league between Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and totally blanking on the third receiver right now. But they've had a very good offensive skill position group around them, and now on the other side of the ball, what happens, as we've seen plenty of times, is the once you sort of have this rise up, you have to start paying guys, and you can't pay everybody, so there ends up being a lot of turnover. That was the case, especially in the secondary for Cincinnati's defense, and as a result, they took a step back. They had a lot of youth in that group, and they just weren't the same effective group that they were for their Super Bowl run a couple years ago. They were 27th in pass defense, 26th in run defense, and 22nd in scoring. So they were not a great group this year. I just think that all of this is important because if you are asking yourself, well, why would the Bengals offensive coordinator get a head coaching job after this season? I think that it's important to consider the circumstances that they were under and that they were, it's a body of work over the handful of these years. And I think that this is probably a pretty good hire for the Titans. Now, do I think that they should have moved on from Mike Vrabel even in the first place? No. So we'll see how this all plays out. I like Vrabel a lot, and I think that there was a lot of talent in the pool. I think that as far as coordinator jobs go, I know that he can't really do these interviews and fully commit to a job yet, but I really like Ben Johnson of the Lions, the offensive coordinator there. So all in all, I think this is about a B signing for them. I think that they could have possibly done better. They definitely could have done worse, though. So I'd give it about a B, just off of initial reactions here. On to Philadelphia, where they just yesterday fired their offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson. Now, this goes along with the firing of their defensive coordinator, Sean Desai, a few days ago. Matt Patricia, who took over defensive play calling duties and a lot of Desai's responsibilities around the 10-1 mark. I believe it was after one of those losses that Patricia took over, and Patricia is no longer expected to be back either. He has an expiring contract coming up in this offseason. It expired come this offseason, and it's not expected that he will be back. So another offseason of sort of getting a fresh slate here in Philadelphia, because last year, if you'll remember, they had both their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator hired to head coaching positions elsewhere in the league. Shane Steichen, he went on to the Colts, and defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon was hired by the Cardinals. So another offseason of a clean house here in Philadelphia. They had a collapse, and after starting 10-1, and this is sort of what happens when you fall as far as they do. I agree with them keeping Nick Sirianni. I'm not the biggest Nick Sirianni fan myself, but I think that's just more of, I don't really like his antics. The players seem to really have his back, though. Fletcher Cox called a reporter a clown, I think, when he was asked about Sirianni's future. If you have the locker room, that's where it all begins. And if the players are there for Sirianni, then I think that they can't let Sirianni go after 2 seasons, a Super Bowl appearance, one that they very easily could have won. And then, yes, a disappointing this year, but still a playoff run, still a playoff appearance, I should say. There wasn't much running when they got there. But I think that keeping him is the right decision. So naturally, the steps of progression are that the coordinators are going to go. So we will see where the Eagles choose to go from there. Now, I sort of alluded to it earlier in the first segment. Joe Barry has been fired from the Green Bay Packers. He was their defensive coordinator for a few seasons, 3, I believe. And it's not a huge surprise, really. If you were following the Packers during the regular season, they were not very good on the defensive side of the ball. And really, for years, there's been complaints about the misuse of players. Jair Alexander, while he does struggle with health, yes, he is one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And a lot of people have been, Packers fans specifically, have been very concerned about the way that he chooses to use him and the other talent on that side of the ball. So I'm not surprised, but I think that it is interesting. He probably, Joe Barry that is, put together 2 of his best coaching performances in the playoffs. Now, a lot of it was the Cowboys collapsing. There was some really weird stuff going on there in Dallas in the first round with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott from the first play not getting along there. So, I don't know. You can make the argument that it was self-inflicted by the other teams. It was the weather against San Francisco, but I thought that he did actually sort of have at least a chance of keeping his job just because of those last 2 games. But again, not surprised ultimately when it comes to the Packers' decision to move on. So talking about some head coaching stuff, still don't have a ton of news on that other than the Titans' decision, but we've at least heard some rumblings, some buzz about what is going on with the other top candidates here. Now, Bill Belichick, he has taken 2 meetings with the Atlanta Falcons. He's been very heavily linked with them from the beginning of the offseason. Now, it's interesting that the interviews really aren't going much further than Atlanta at this point. I thought that there would maybe be some more potential suitors. The Chargers, a lot of people liked to link to him because there's a quarterback there and he just has to correct this defense that has been horrible for them the past few years under Brandon Staley. But I can at least understand, it's the West Coast for Belichick. You got to keep in mind how old he is, the lifestyle that he wants to live. I'm not shocked that there isn't mutual interest there. I thought that Washington would be a little bit more of an interesting location, and there really hasn't been much noise there. I don't actually think that Ron Rivera has been officially let go yet at this point. I could be wrong on that. I think that, and I'm not, I don't like to advocate for people losing their jobs, but I think it would be crazy if they went into next season with Ron Rivera as well. Now, they have Eric Bieniemy on the coaching staff there already, so I don't know if they have some sort of a succession plan as it is there, but not a lot of love for Bill Belichick as far as the coaching carousel has gone up to this point, which I just find interesting. One of the other key names in this offseason of coaching, Jim Harbaugh, likely to make the switch from college football back to the NFL. The Chargers have been very much linked to him. We'll sort of get on that a little bit. He is, I did see a report that he is still reportedly in play for the Falcons as well. So the Falcons have been taking a lot of interviews up to this point. Even with interviewing Bill Belichick 2 times, they are keeping their options open. And that could include Jim Harbaugh, but off of the jump of the offseason, and really once Harbaugh left Michigan, a lot of people have been talking about him to the Chargers. Now, interestingly enough, there has been some recent reports that Pete Carroll is actually potentially in play for that job as well. I don't think that he was really looking to coach elsewhere when he was told that he wasn't going to be returning as the coach next season for the Seahawks. And this is actually the main destination he would want to go to if that were the case. So still monitoring a lot of this stuff. It's interesting though how these three legendary coaches of their own right are sort of connected for these same jobs, trying to battle it out here. So I am very interested in how this plays out. It's also worth mentioning that the Raiders have retained Antonio Pierce, their interim coach for this past season. He will be the head coach going the next year. I think that's the far and away clear choice for the Raiders after really screwing up a couple years ago when they had the interim coach situation and they end up bringing in Josh McDaniels, and that was bad from the jump. So I'm glad that Antonio Pierce gets his chance. The players loved him there, and it just seemed like the right thing to do. So that is the NFL coaching carousel update. We are going to be sticking with head coaching gigs in the next segment when we jump to the NBA, and we will be talking about some breaking news from the association, so stick around.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just finished up updating the NFL head coaching and coordinator cycle, and on that note, we're going to be moving on to the NBA, where we had, in my opinion, a very surprising move from one of the best teams in basketball in terms of their head coaching decision. Yesterday, the Bucks fired their first-year head coach, Adrian Griffin, after just 43 games, in which they went 30-13 during the stretch and were second in the Eastern Conference. It was clear that there was something going on behind the scenes, really, for a while. It really started during the Bucks in-season tournament loss against the Pacers, where there were some stories that came out. I think Chris Haynes had it first, that in the locker room afterwards, there were some words exchanged between Griffin and Bobby Portis. Griffin was getting on the team's case about rebounding and playing with more effort, sacrificing, and Bobby Portis also called out Adrian Griffin, saying that he needs to be better and actually coach them, especially later in games, on offense and do more. So an exchange of words then, and from there it seemed like Adrian Griffin had just lost the locker room. Giannis had some interesting moments throughout the course of the year where his body language was just off, and naturally when you have your star player unhappy, these are the things that tend to happen across the NBA. The Bucks were second in the league in offensive rating. Now, obviously, a lot of talent on that end of the ball, but they were 21st in defensive rating and not getting any better. And yes, you have maybe some lackluster guards to help contribute on that side of the ball between Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley. They had traded Grayson Allen to acquire Damian Lillard, which obviously an offensive upgrade, but you still looked at their defense, and Chris Middleton, we'll see. I think that he's had his moments, but he hasn't really been the vintage Chris Middleton that he was for the Bucks championship run a couple seasons ago. And when you have that much of a lackluster group defensively, it is obviously a tough task. Now, that being said, they do still have two defensive anchors, Giannis Antetokounmpo and Brook Lopez, who should be raising the floor of your defense. Brook Lopez has still been great this season. Giannis, I thought that he was maybe going to have a little bit more of an impact on that side of the ball, given the fact that Dame was coming in and could take some of the offensive load off of him. But all in all, they have just been a bad product on that side of the ball. And I think that that was some of the fans' gripes with this team. But ultimately, I think it comes down to that locker room. It sounds like from that loss on, the team really didn't have faith in him, and trying to continue on this run with a coach who hasn't proven anything. You are a championship expectation team. You did so a couple seasons ago. Yes, the group isn't exactly the same anymore, but that is what the guys in that locker room are thinking. We are playing for a championship here, and they just didn't really believe that he was the one who could get them to that. So then come today, there were reports last night by CNN and such, TNT, during the in-between time from the Nets and Knicks game and the Lakers and Clippers game. They were talking about how Doc Rivers was working his way to an agreement with the Milwaukee Bucks. ESPN picked it up today and officially declared the contract agreement. So Doc Rivers is now the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. Doc Rivers was just fired by the 76ers after last season. The Sixers blew a 3-2 lead to the Boston Celtics, and he was let go. Was pretty good, I think, doing play-by-play and announcing on some of these national TV games for the season, but we're going to have to hold off on hearing more of him from the booth because he will be on the sideline in Milwaukee. So, in my opinion, I think that Doc Rivers was the best immediate answer. It's obviously the middle of the season. The halfway point just struck for most of, if not all, the teams within the past week, reaching game 41 of the 82-game season. So, I think that they put themselves in a bad position through the past year or so, and desperate times call for desperate measures. I like Doc Rivers, but it is very fair, I think, for people to have concerns with him based off of how the last few years of his coaching career have gone. And I think that just before we get into Doc Rivers himself, just sort of laying out the timeline here, because the Bucks decided to fire Mike Budenholzer coming off of the upset in the playoffs this year where they lost. They were the 1 seed and lost to the 8th seeded Miami Heat team. Now, I was never a huge fan of Mike Budenholzer. I don't know. I thought that he was very stubborn in some of his philosophies. The heavy drop coverage from Brook Lopez on defense as far as in the screen game, making sure Brook Lopez plays in the paint as opposed to coming up and contesting shooters. I thought that at times that hurt him and the team, but at the same time, he helped Brook Lopez, get national recognition for being an all defensive center for their team, and they won the championship in 2021. And when that happened, and I was still sort of concerned with Budenholzer, I'm like, okay, well, you know what? He just got himself another 10 years of a leash here, because I think that up to that point, that was the point in time where Giannis had a couple MVPs, but not much playoff success. Budenholzer maybe had a coach of the year at that point with Milwaukee, but again, hadn't gotten over the hump yet. And I thought that in 2021, if they didn't win, that could be Budenholzer's last year. But then they go on to win it. And I thought that, things were going to go forward like this, but they were not. Now, if you look back to last season in their loss to the Heat, you can call it an embarrassment, but obviously Giannis missed the majority of that series, and the Miami Heat ended up going to the finals. So I don't think that it's quite as embarrassing as people may make it out to be. Yes, the 1 versus 8 never looks good, but it's hard to do when your star player misses most of that series and the team that you're playing wasn't a real 8 seed. Like, yes, they almost lost to the Bulls, interestingly enough. Nobody ever talks about that. The fact that they almost didn't make the playoffs in general because they were trailing the Bulls in the play-in tournament, but end up coming back there and then making the run all the way to the finals. So I think that it's not that bad of a look for Budenholzer himself. I don't know how much more he could have done. Chris Middleton, he's made steps this season, but even last year he was even less of himself, and it was asking an older Drew Holiday to be the offensive and defensive anchor on the perimeter. I don't think that the circumstances were great there for them, and I didn't really agree with the decision to fire him then. I think it gets even more interesting when you consider the timeline of the fact that at that time they didn't know that they were going to have the chance even to trade for Damian Lillard. And looking back at it, I don't know if they would have fired him if they knew they were getting Dame, because Dame is now in his 30s on a very expensive contract, and I think that when you make that sort of a trade, you're doing so for one reason, mostly one reason, to win a championship. I think it was also to show Giannis that they were committed to him long term. But I think that was the initial idea of moving off of Budenholzer and finding a coach that Giannis liked, was we want to make our star player happy for the time to come. And in that process, they made some questionable moves, in my opinion. And it's hard, again, especially in the NBA, where this is such a players-driven league, to openly go against your star player. But reports in the past 24 hours have come out that Nick Nurse, who was with the Raptors when they won the finals in 2019, he was almost the creator of the wall type defense that has tried to be replicated. There's no fully stopping Giannis, but the wall idea came from that finals run by Nick Nurse and the Raptors in that postseason run that sort of stuck around with Giannis for, again, nobody's stopping this guy, but the best defense almost possible to guard him was generated from Nick Nurse. Now, I'm not sure why, but Giannis was reportedly did not want to play for Nick Nurse. He made that very clear in the offseason, despite Nick Nurse being a finalist for the position based off of people in the front office wanting him. But when they heard that Giannis did not want to play for him, they cast him aside. He ends up signing with the Philadelphia 76ers, and we've seen the success that the Sixers have had this season. Now, they've always been a good regular season team these past handful of years, but you get the point. I think that Nick Nurse is a very good coach in the league, and it's hard to say they made the mistake by not hiring him based off of the fact that Giannis would have been upset if they did, because that's just what the NBA is right now. But if you know you're not going to be able to hire, and maybe this is unfair of me to say, but if you know you're not going to be able to hire the best coach available on the market because of any factor, this one being that Giannis didn't want to play for him, why let go of the good coach you already have? I don't think Budenholzer was great, but I thought he was good enough. He showed that he was good enough, and they end up firing him and bringing in Adrian Griffin, who was more so Giannis's pick, and it seems like they're hurt as a result of this. And so that brings us to yesterday, where 43 games into the season, they don't have a head coach anymore. So again, I think that Doc was the best solution available to them at that time. Doc Rivers is a very historic coach. He won the finals in 2008 with the Celtics. He's won a Coach of the Year award in the past. But there's also a little bit of negative history that follows him. He's blown 3-1 leads. He's 6-10 as a head coach in Game 7s, and he's lost the last 5 of which. One of them came last year after blowing a 3-2 lead against the Celtics. So there's just a lot of baggage, a lot of different ways to look at the way that this is all played out. And I think it's going to be tough for him to get acclimated with this team already halfway through the year. But at least it's not like they have a lot of room in the standings to make up for. They are the number 2 seed. They're just a few games out from the number 1 seeded Boston Celtics. So it's not like they have to fully rediscover themselves and figure out new philosophies to work. That offense is baseline very good. A defense is going to need work. And I think that they might need work from outside of the organization. They might have to make a trade. I don't know. I think that after finding out all of this news and such, I don't think I'd have them in the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference. I would have the Celtics above them, and I would have the Miami Heat above them. And I think it's also, if you want to assume that Joel Embiid is fully healthy, I also think that them and the Sixers are, just neck and neck. The top of the East is very loaded. So it's going to be difficult to try and reimagine themselves on the fly like this going into the playoffs. But we'll see. Doc Rivers has done so before. So we will just have to be continuing to monitor the situation. So that's all we have on the Bucks. We're going to be sticking in the NBA and talking about the Los Angeles Lakers on the other side of the break. So stick with us. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are going into our final segment here. Today we have talked about the 49ers. We've talked about the head coaching carousel. We just wrapped up talking about Doc Rivers being hired by the Milwaukee Bucks. We are finishing off the show today by talking about the Los Angeles Lakers. If you missed any of the previous segments, check out our YouTube to get those. But for now, we will be moving on to the last segment of the day. the Los Angeles Lakers. So last night they lost to the LA Clippers 127-116 in the first night of NBA rivalry night, which a lot of people are sort of coming at it saying it's maybe corny and that they are trying too hard to force rivalries and such. I think it's cool. I know that, you know, the NBA isn't quite as packed with rivalries as maybe it once was, but it does still have some intriguing back and forths. Like one, for example, that I think that people are just sort of overlooking to a little bit of a degree is the San Antonio Spurs and the OKC Thunder who are playing. Now, I know both of these teams are very different in talent and expectations as it currently stands, but I think that Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren is actually a very compelling matchup. I know that it wasn't good the last time that they played, but Wemby is so much better now than he was at the time. This was within the first month of the season. I think that he's leaps and bounds better than he was when the league started. So that's just a quick aside on this rivalry week initiative from the NBA. Last night, the Lakers played in one of these matchups, and they lost to their rival across the town, to the Clippers. Now, LeBron James did not play in this game. He had an ankle injury, so he sat this one out. And despite that, the Lakers were actually still in this game. They had it a 2-point game a couple times in the fourth quarter, but just couldn't get it done. The Clippers are a very good team this season. They are missing their center, Ivica Zubac, right now. So both teams a little shorthanded, but that's the Lakers obviously are so much more reliant on LeBron James than the Clippers are Zubac. So the Lakers fall to 22-23. They fall under 500 once again. They are the 9th seed in the Western Conference. The teams that are ahead of them right now, the 8th-seeded Dallas Mavericks, 7th-seeded Sacramento Kings. Phoenix has climbed up from the struggle that they were under. The Pelicans are up there, and then all the usual suspects that are at the top of the conference that the Lakers probably don't have to worry about because they are probably not catching that. I think that when you look at the Lakers in general, right? For me, I just want to sort of get out ahead of this. If the Lakers are in a playoff series, they're a scary team. Especially because if they are healthy, I have no doubt that LeBron James can elevate his game to a level that we don't see on a night-to-night basis during the regular season. I think a microcosm of that was the in-season tournament where he was tremendous during the run because, I mean, for various different reasons, I think that he was trying to help the NBA sort of raise the platform of this in-season tournament, get more people invested in it. He was phenomenal. And then obviously Anthony Davis in the finals of that game was a monster. So I don't doubt that those two stars can be just as good of a duo as anybody else in the league when they fully want to bring it out. The concern for them, though, is the fact that despite these two players who Anthony Davis has been sort of made fun of for a handful of years now for not being able to stay healthy, LeBron James, currently 39 years old, they've been actually present and playing in just about every game so far this season. LeBron has played in 40 of their 45 games. Anthony Davis has only missed 2 games, playing in 43 of 45 games. So having these stars be as available as they have been, and for two guys that haven't been quite as available in the past handful of seasons and still being sub 500 is a concern to me. Now, again, you get to that play-in tournament, everything sort of changes, but I don't think that they're going to have what it takes really to climb their way out of the 7 through 10 seed to avoid being a part of the play-in tournament in general. And I think that they're going to need to make some moves on their roster because they have a lot of fine players. Like D'Angelo Russell is fine, and if you just look at his stats, he's having a very impressive scoring season. But it's just tough when you consider the defense, some of the decision making from him. He's making a lot of money, which sort of restricts their other moves. Now, it almost seemed like him and Rui Hachimura, the Lakers, signed them to these contracts to help make them be able to pair up with other potential stars come the trade deadline. I think that one guy in particular that they were really looking at trying to acquire was Kyrie Irving. There were reports that Kyrie was even mutually interested during LeBron's playoff run and during the offseason of coming to the Lakers. But the Mavericks are currently ahead of the Lakers in the standings right now. And, you know, if you are Kyrie and the Mavericks, I think that your ceiling probably isn't as high as the Lakers is, especially if Kyrie were to go to LA. But I think that Kyrie's probably a little happy with where he is right now. I think that him and Luka have definitely developed a better relationship this year than they had last year. And they're getting a lot of very good production from some role players. Dante Exum, Grant Williams, Derek Lively, their first round rookie. Derek Jones Jr. has proven me wrong. I was not high on him at all, and when I saw he was starting games for them, I was very concerned, but he's doing what he needs to as a 3-and-D player. Josh Green has been playing well recently. So, Maxi Kleber, I think coming off the bench, this was a guy who was forced into that starting role for a while, and it's like, well, that's sort of a hole. Now, him coming off the bench, I think, is a totally different monster. I think that he's a good presence on both ends. So I actually like this Mavericks team more than I was expecting to. And I don't know if Kyrie is going to be an available piece for them to add. So then you start looking around. It's like, well, who are the other stars that are going to be available? Zach LaVine is a name that's been shopped around a lot. And Zach LaVine, I definitely, if he were traded to the Lakers and, you know, became a better player, bought in more on the defensive side of the ball, and, you know, could excel more as not having to be a true number one, but also still being able to have the room of taking over a game at times. I mean, I don't hate, it's a lot of money for him. It's a lot of money, which would be my concern, but I don't hate it for the Lakers there. DeMar DeRozan on the same team, obviously. I don't think that works because there's not enough perimeter shooting, but I just don't think that there are going to be that many stars available. Could they make a Godfather package for a Donovan Mitchell? Maybe. But the Cavs are playing unbelievable right now, and I just don't think that there's going to be the star talent on the market. So what do the Lakers need? They need shooting, baseline. That is very obvious, and it has been obvious. They're relying on a lot of guys who are very spotty. You have Rui Hachimura playing big minutes for them. Jared Vanderbilt can't really shoot a lick. And they've had shooters on their team. I think it's crazy that Malik Beasley's been one of the best shooters in the NBA this season. He was just sitting on the bench in LA last year when we were still sort of talking about the problems with shooting. Now, I think that an underrated part of the Lakers game here is they're actually very impressive running out in transition. I think better than I was expecting. I think that Cam Reddish has been solid for them. Taurean Prince has been solid for them. I like their wing depth, honestly, for the most part. And they are 9th in the league in pace right now, and they play pretty well out of that high pace, which you wouldn't expect because of LeBron and AD being as old as they are, but part of it's just the maestro that LeBron is, being able to make huge passes out in transition and get those teams running. They do actually have a good amount of rookies and young players. Hood Schifino, Maxwell Lewis, They have Christie from last year that they drafted late. And I think that they're not super far away is the thing. Their season relies on LeBron and AD being healthy. As long as that happens, they should be a playoff team, and I think they come out of a play-in tournament. But when you look at the top of the West and you look at the Minnesotas, who I know a lot of people are down on them right now, may be fair, but really it's just all about the Nuggets. And eventually, once you get to the Suns, if they can fully come into their own, I don't think that they have the true offensive firepower to keep up with these teams. Their defense is good enough, but I don't think that they are a top team in their conference right now. And I think that they're going to have to be active in the trade deadline to improve their roster. So that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Don't forget to like and follow. It helps us out a lot. And we will